Welcome, students. I'm Professor Patti, and this week we are talking about the Code of Ethics. Now, in most social work programs, undergrad and graduate, the Code of Ethics has been a suggested reading or a required reading, and professors generally have told me to become familiar. And they might have a quiz on it. But in this presentation today, in this lecture, I'm hoping to review with you all of the regulating bodies in the state of Ohio. No problem, easy breezy. Now, as I've been writing this lecture, I've been adding in slides, realizing there's a whole lot of regulation that occurs in social work. Now, in the state of Ohio, we have our own laws and rules, which we will go over shortly. And there's an Ohio Revised Code. Anything that is legal or illegal should be listed in here. And 4757 reviews what the state of Ohio says social workers, social worker trainees, and independently licensed social workers and social work supervision, who those people are and what those people can do under licensure. But there's nationally, there's a few, the CSWE, the NASW, and the ASWB have national standards, and there are some differences from state to state, not too many for the ASWB and the CSWE, based on the laws and administrative rules for those states. So the Association of Social Work Board acts as the central test-taking regulator. So they write the exams, they evaluate the exams, they assess the exams, they look at who's passing and who's not. And, you know, it's anybody's guess what they do with that information. But we do know that they are the people that you will get your invitation to take the exam from. The ASWB communicates with the Council for Social, the Counselor, Social Worker, Marriage and Family Therapist Board, who issues your license and will issue your license, and you will submit your CEUs to, if audited for the rest of your career, to the Counselor, Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapist Board of Ohio. The Council on Social Work Education goes through a process of accreditation, and we can look on our website here which programs are accredited and which are not. You can see I've selected the state of Ohio, a master's program, and is there an online option? And here we have Case Western Reserve, Cleveland State University, Mount Vernon Nazarene, The Ohio State University, Ohio University, and the University of Akron. So online accredited programs, there's only a few. I believe there's 6. So what if we don't care if it's online? Then our options go way up, including you have some colleagues from universities that I bet you've never even heard of. Isn't that wonderful? And they all have the same educational standards. I want to call it volunteering. Your internship, your unpaid internship that you pay to take, all of the accredited programs in the state of Ohio do require that. And those are driven by the Council on Social Work Education. Now, the National Association of Social Workers, you do not need to be a member, although I am sure that you have had some professors who have talked about the NASW student membership. Great things about membership include being involved in continuing education credits. There are free lunch and learn online continuing education credits, and any social worker who I know, all the people who hang with me really love conferences, and NASW has fabulous local, state, and national conferences that you just don't want to miss, because there's all kinds of profession-specific, population-specific conferences you can attend, but there's nothing like NASW. There's nothing like learning alongside other social workers. In addition to having membership that is not required, you are required to abide by the Code of Ethics, which we have online, and we have links to within our course, and also here. the NASW, the code of ethics and values that are specific to social workers, which differentiate it from other professions and help give us objective standard language of what the public can expect and what we can expect from one another of how we behave when no one is looking. Now, in the state of Ohio, we have administrative laws and rules. ODRC chapter 4757 regulates social workers, and 01, 02, and 03 regulate specifically in the state of Ohio having a social work assistant license. Means that you can participate in intake assessment. That's one of our competencies, isn't it? To assess individuals, groups, families, and communities. So as a social work assistant, you can complete an intake assessment and refer for services. You can screen individuals. So that would be like SAMHSA programs, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services of America, SBIRT, which is Screening, Brief Intervention, Referral, and Treatment. Social work assistants can do that SBIRT stuff. They can intervene in crisis and resolution. So if you're texting 988 or 741 or you're calling, social workers can be the people on the other end of that crisis line and resolution. Crisis intervention, prevention, and resolution is what most programs try to focus on. They can also provide community support, case management, and outreach. So the mental health is a huge component of our population that social workers work on, and fee-for-service mental health care, which was revised with behavioral health redesign. There's a lot of standards statewide of who is eligible to receive community support from social workers, but social workers are able to provide community support outside of the mental health context. If it happens outside of your job, it's hard to know what the many things are. And I always say, nobody knows what a social worker does, but we know when we need one. So community support, case management, and outreach. So this would be like, I just met with the nurse practitioner and field officer with the fire department in Belmont County who has a program called Belmont Cares, where they have higher needs 911 calls, EMS calls. They have a weekly and daily list that they say, hey, can you give extra support and outreach to these people? And when I talked to them, they said, boy, could we use a social worker on our team, because there's a lot of need out there in the world. And record keeping, I mean, who can beat a social worker in record keeping? If you've seen the Honest Halloween costumes, the ones for social workers generally have a stack of case notes that are not updated. We do record keeping in addition within other disciplines, such as social histories in criminal justice, which we talked about in our interview with our former court psychiatric director, Michael Queso, and also the public defender's office in Cuyahoga County has social workers complete social histories. Visual observation of person and environment. So this is in line with probation officers, caseworkers for DCFS and family courts, juvenile courts, observe and report. And those things hold up in a court of law just the same way an officer's testimony does. Officers have reasonableness. Social workers do not have a reasonableness test. They have rules and laws and ethics. Social worker assistants can assist with the facilitation with groups and families. So group work is wonderful and dynamic. And if you, at this point in your program, have not taken a social work with groups class, I love it. Because there are things that happen in group dynamics and peer dynamics. Think of 12-step programs, NA and AA. There are dynamics of peer support that transcend what a professional facilitator or moderator can do one-on-one or in a group, in a lecture format such as this. Social workers engage in advocacy. Advocacy is when we walk alongside and use our voice to uplift the voices of people who have a hard time being heard. And so inherently in advocacy work, there is a power differential, and that power differential is spoken to in a number of ways. Mostly, to me, the first three social work competencies, which seem a little, the language can be a little vague and overlapping. And so though that the advocacy and cultural humility need to really go hand in hand with social work. Social workers can engage in orientation activities, education, and prevention services, which this really is the heart of a lot of community programs like parenting program, positive education program, PEP connections, screening and referral and early prevention. Head Start programs are prevention services. So those are all things that you could see a social work assistant in. Now, this is in the state of Ohio, what a social work assistant can do. But who says what a social work assistant is? Well, that would be the counselor, social worker, marriage and family therapist board. So if you would like to get licensed as an MSW, LSW after this program, this is the website you will go through. And it regulates art therapists, counselors, social workers, marriage and family therapists, music therapists, people who live out of state who are applying for licensure for a collateral licensure, a licensure swap. Does provide counseling or licensing resources. Thank you. Now, you can look through any of these PDFs. This is a .gov. That's how you can tell it's a real government site here. But there are social work assistant, LSW, LISW, and LISWS instructions that I would strongly encourage you to be talking with someone at your internship about, because you're likely supervised by someone with an LISWS, which means they have gone through this very, very governmental process. Social work assistants. So we just talked about all the things social work assistants can do. What about dependently licensed social workers? So if you are in school, you are past a certain point of your social work programming, and you are in an accredited social work program, you can apply for an SWT. An SWT, while you are actively in school, functions similarly to an LSW. So when I have my bachelor's from the College of Mount St. Joseph from an accredited university, and I took my LSW exam and passed it, then I was an LSW. So I was an LSW for close to 15 years before I entered my master's. So I didn't have to take the test upon graduation. I already had it. So that is one way to skip the MSW, LSW exam, is to have an LSW when you enroll. If you do not, you can still do all the things I was doing as an LSW while you're in school under supervision of an LISWS. So one of those wonderful things is you may practice as an independent contractor. Independent contractor is a buzzword for you could be a grant writer. You could be a consultant. You could work in fidelity implementation. You could be a private practice therapist. The scope of practice for a social worker may include the following range of psychosocial duties. So these are similar to social work assistant, I think. Intervention planning. So this is moving beyond the first competency of social work. Sorry, we have the 4, 5, 6, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, which is intervene. We assess individuals. We intervene with individuals. We plan with we evaluate, right? All of those things with individuals, families, groups, and communities. So we're not just intaking, screening, brief intervention, referral, right? We're actually planning which interventions meet these assessed needs. We can provide psychosocial intervention, and psychosocial intervention is one fancy way of saying psychotherapy. So any therapy that a counseling psychologist can provide with a PhD who has passed the board, you can also provide that psychosocial intervention, pretty much. You can be a counselor, you can provide social psychotherapy, you can evaluate people, and you can engage in prevention. So there's some nuance, but often having an LSW, they pay you like an extra $1,000 a year to have an LSW. But more importantly, you could, for example, be someone who goes into emergency rooms and assesses whether or not someone meets criteria for emergency hospitalization in the state hospital. And that's for emergency hospitalizations only, criminal justice intervention and rehabilitation. People who are found not guilty by reason of insanity have their sentence sent to a state hospital. So there's a lot of forensic and hospital and mental health and healthcare evaluations that you can be engaging in. So that, again, you might get an extra $500, but you have a great expansion of services and skills. Now, for an independently licensed social worker, we have 3 different slides of teeny tiny print, right? So we have the psychosocial. Do you see how this entire thing that an LSW can do is the first pretty much statement for an LISW, an independently licensed social worker. Also, independently licensed social workers can assess programs, plan, engage in development, program implementation, and evaluation. So that's a lot. I mean, we're only on number 2, and this is already a great broadening of responsibilities. So when I was looking at master's degrees, I already had my bachelor's in social work and 15 years of experience, and I was considering being a psychiatrist, going back to med school. I was considering being a nurse practitioner because I worked with a bunch and they were top notch. I considered a law degree, and I considered chemical engineering because that's something that I had considered in high school and kind of thought, sounds like a lot of math. Well, after 15 years with an LSW, I thought I could probably triple my pay in a very short period of time, and I could just give money to charities. But what sold me on not becoming a nurse practitioner is I would have to be an RN first because you have to be a practicing nurse. And that was just a whole lot of extra steps that I did not want to engage in. I didn't want to be a psychiatrist because that would be like 8 years I didn't see my children versus 2 years of getting a master's degree in social work. And then I considered counseling, a master's in education with the PCC certification. And I was looking at a master's in nonprofit administration. And when I talked with people who had each of these degrees, and I talked with them about their career opportunities, the person with the LISW kind of sold me on it because he said, when you're an LSW, like, here's the ceiling on how much money you can make. But when you are an independently licensed social worker, here's the floor on what you can make. And the ceiling is kind of endless. There's so many opportunities for it. And that comes from program planning, program development, program implementation. That's where you can do a lot of the independent consulting work. Organizational assessment, an example of this would be when in 2008, we had a housing crisis that was manufactured by the banking industries for a very long time. It was very predictable, and people who were assessing, planning, and developing in housing were saying, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And then 2008, we had this housing bubble burst. Who could have seen it, right? The organizational assessment of HUD, which oversees all of our emergency shelter grants, said, The family homelessness we are going to see is going to be insurmountable, and we are going to have to zone new shelters, and that's going to cost a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars. And if you have found someone who wants to build a homeless shelter in their neighborhood, I would like to talk to you about that very magical place, because most of the places I worked in the state of Ohio and Kentucky, they say not in my backyard, right? So the organizational assessment that was needed was developing HPRP, homeless prevention and rapid rehousing assessments. And so in Cuyahoga County, we had an entire collaborative that engaged in some advanced learning, and we engaged in some organizational assessment with experts from the state of New York who came in and helped us with fidelity and with implementation. And there was all kinds of support that was needed. And social workers are key, have key skills in those areas. Specialized problem-oriented assessment, specialized project or case-oriented planning, specialized intervention, evaluation of consultation activities. So this is a great sentence, number 4, of why nobody knows what a social worker does, but we know when we need one. We need someone who's got a nuanced understanding and understands person and environment, and how to benefit the individual, and how to assess the community and build the community to alleviate community concerns alongside individual concerns. So what is this individual problem representing? Where is the failure in the system? So social workers, we do it all. And the last one is providing clinical supervision of social work assistance. So we can do everything except social workers, except for their training supervision, professional counselors, and marriage and family therapists, and supervision of chemical dependency counselors. So when you are an LISW, you cannot do that unless you have a clinical supervision, the S on the end of your licensure. So once you have your LISW, this is spelled out with CSWMFT, what is required for the LISW, which is an additional, I believe, 9 hours of coursework, which can be continuing education, or you can apply to have a college course count towards it, and a year of supervising, which is right here. You can supervise social work assistants, social workers like LSWs, but you cannot provide their training supervision until you obtain the S. So training supervision is how you go 4,000 hours of work that take no less than 2 years and pass the exam and engage in 150 hours of LISWS only supervised training supervision only from the state of Ohio. Does not count it's the person's from another state. Then you go from the LISW to the S. So that training supervision is different than clinical supervision or task supervision or job supervision. So an LISW can, for example, supervise interns, but they cannot provide training supervision, which is fine because you can't receive training supervision until you have LSW, and you don't have the LSW until after you graduate and pass the exam. All right. The scope of practice for independent social workers with supervision may include psychosocial assessment. So it's a lot of the same thing, program, and then program assessment, and clinical supervision, and training and clinical supervision, which again is outlined exactly how to log this and how many you need right in here in these releases. Always better to go through with a friend. So what is the NASW? What could the NASW possibly have to say after all of that? Well, I'll tell you. the NASW says social workers, unlike other helping professions, so I don't know, I'm guessing marriage and family therapists and professional counselors and music therapists have different focuses on their ethics. Here's the main ones to me that make a social worker a social worker. There is a dual focus. We focus on the individual well-being and well-being of society in our assessments, engagements, interventions, evaluations. We promote social change with and on behalf of clients. So promoting social change can mean being critical of systems, of rules, of laws. For example, I know many social workers who are extremely critical only based on the evidence and the data on the gatekeeping that is done by the Association of Social Work Boards. We can prepare students to take the test, understand the ways that social workers uniquely support our communities, and also be critical of the gatekeeping policies that result in very predictable outcomes in the ASWB exam. We seek systemic solutions for the benefit of all. So we have core values of social work. Like I said, police officers have a reasonable test, a reasonableness. Would someone else in this position, would a reasonable person have done the same thing? And I think that's a great litmus test, because anyone could do anything, but a reasonable person behaves with the culture, mores, and values of the dominant cultural group. Well, social workers have their own culture. We have our own tribe, we have our own cult, we have our own ways of behaving. And those ways of behaving revolve around the values of service, social justice, the dignity and worth of the person, importance of human relationships, integrity, and competence, all of which we will go over a little bit more in detail later on in the presentation. So what is the purpose of all of this regulation? All of this regulation serves to explain to people this is a social worker, and when someone says this is a social worker, this is what they mean. Which this is why when you say that DCFS is social workers, we are quick to say those are caseworkers. The Department of Children and Family Services serves at the pleasure of family court, and they are part of the justice system, which is under the executive branch of government, or which is under the judicial branch of government. We do not serve as part of the government. So there are social workers who work for the Department of Children and Family Services, just like there are probation officers that work for family court and common pleas court and municipal courts and federal probation. And those people who are probation officers and officers of the court might do some of the same things as a social work assistant. They might have some of the same job titles, but this code of ethics talks about how a social worker would behave differently within those roles. So the code of ethics talks about the values of social work that across state, across level of government, across employer, how social workers, what are the principles and ethical standards that they can consult on and rely on, and what can the public expect? The NASW serves for conflict resolution. I'm going to give you an ethical dilemma. If I am a peer sex educator in a small county, let's say a county of less than 10,000 people, it is likely that many of my patients will have gone to the same high school as me. That is a boundary crossing. There's an immediate ethical dilemma. A dilemma means there's gray area, because they're going to know some of the people and I'm going to know some of the same people, and maybe we even know one another. But the dilemma is, what am I going to do? Not treat this person? If I was teaching an online program and one of my former coworkers is in the course. It is inevitable that there's going to be dilemmas and boundary crossings. So how do we resolve that conflict and make a decision that's more than just, I did what was best. I did what I felt. I did the best that I could do. Well, there are some pretty clear accountability guidelines on how you are supposed to resolve, discuss, and document any kind of disputes. And dilemmas are inevitable, but we resolve a dilemma by documenting that we recognized it and that we made a decision and what the decision was. And that's how we resolve almost all of our dilemmas. Special or social standards. So how we regulate our career, how we continue to improve ourselves and engage in practice-informed research and research-informed practice throughout our career, and how the NASW Code of Ethics talks about how we socialize new practitioners to the field. And many of us are in this field for purpose-driven reasons, and those purpose-driven reasons are not common to any of us. We all have unique experiences. So how do we socialize without talking about AA, without talking about our church, without talking about our temple and saying, this is the only way that it can be? Well, that we don't all have to agree on or belong to all of the organizations, but we do have to agree on, socialize, and give that positive peer support to self-adjust and help new career clinicians self-adjust to our regulations. NASW ethical principles. Value 1 is service. Social workers' primary goal is to help people in need and to address social problems. So service to others can mean that social workers tend to skip their lunches. That is not service to others. That is service to our productivity and turn-in time goals usually. But generally, social workers are employed in areas where there's just higher poverty. If you look at our code of ethics, one of the first things that they say is that we should plan to provide pro bono services. And I really love the idea of planning that. And I think it's a great guideline to look at the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association and say, how many pro bono hours per year are required of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association to hold a law license in this region? And maybe that's the number of pro bono hours that we provide for free. Pro bono hours, so as not to be an ethical dilemma, are always discussed with people. So a recent example of service of pro bono, and again, this goes back to policy and speaking out against policies, is we have technical mental health parity in Ohio. So that means that the early 2000s, between 2000 and 2010, there was great advocacy, organizing, and policy writing to require insurance providers to cover mental health, behavioral health services, and substance abuse, which is a mental health issue. All those services previously, insurance companies could say, we don't provide that, or you would have to pay extra, or everyone's out of network. So now insurance companies have to provide a benefit, but they don't have to provide a medically necessary benefit. So I have a patient who's been seeing me for several years, and every year they run out of visits around August or September. And so my options are to see this person with less frequency through the year, or to see this person pro bono. And this last year, the person moved, they graduated high school. They had a major spinal surgery in the last 3 months of their senior year. They required advocacy around human rights concerns, several organizations. They had a parent who was involved in extensive litigation that was creating family strain. They accepted and enrolled in and moved into university. And so I saw this person almost every week. And there was medical necessity, and the insurance company did not care. So we had a plan to provide services as needed, mostly every week, every other week as we could, and to practice moving our spacing out so that next year all the services could be covered, and to see if we could do that. So there was a pro bono plan. So my planned pro bono services is to have most services that I engage people in to be paid, because I pay my rent every month. What is the value? The value is social justice. There's a term that popped up within the last 15 years of social justice warriors. And I have a family member who's not a social worker who is like, I feel I am a social justice warrior. I'm so excited about it. I want to collect a pension just like a military veteran. And I don't exactly feel the same way. I feel like social justice warrior is more of a colloquial term or a major cultural term. What we mean when we're talking about social justice within a social work context, and especially in the context of engagement with communities, is that we want to, in the words of Cuyahoga County, in their mission statement, we want to create an environment where all citizens thrive. We want the value and the ethos of the true American dream, that this is a place where people can come and people can live and people can do an honest day's work and receive fair pay. So that is something that categorically is untrue for most people in the United States of America. So a social justice value would be discussing the impact of day labor on the ability of people to provide for their own basic needs. Because if you're an employer and you are trading their services for your wealth, that person should be able to meet basic human needs. And that's, social justice. We have lots of examples of how and why it looks that way. We look for research. We look for community assessments the way that you are doing, and engaging with communities, advanced generalist practice with communities. Often social justice concerns are the ones that are brought up, and communities are interested in making sure that the people who are a part of this community are receiving fair treatment, and that nobody is receiving an unearned benefit. That's often a conflict with social justice, is people who are concerned about unearned benefits coming through. So in social work, our community engagement skills and cultural humility skills revolve around helping individuals, families, groups, and communities to determine how individuals and society can be well. Because we certainly don't want a few people to have to do most of the work, unless we're on a cruise ship, which we Americans really do love, when a few people do the majority of the work. The value that we have is the dignity and worth of the person. I had a great phone call this morning where I was talking about, remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return. When we're talking about social justice, I think that it's easy to fall into despair. The closer that you look into the policies that shape our laws, rules, regulations, fines, fees, and criminal justice, it can be pretty bleak and it can be pretty despairing. And I personally take comfort in remembering that there is nothing that we are going to build that is going to outlast this planet. And that even the worst buildings that I hate will eventually crumble to dust. In that even our problems are not going to be eternal, right? And some problems might outlast me, but all I can do is show up with a helping hand and hopefully with a little bit of light in my heart. And the person I was talking to on the phone said, "Oh, I really love this concept of dust as something that just like covers, and we think of it as like just dust and it's just in the way and we sweep it away." And he said, dust is really intricate and all of these things live or are potential within it. All of the many prions and neutrons and skin cells and bacteria and viruses, and there's so many things that are within dust if you look really closely, right? And so if we think of the other people that we run into in our lives as dust, we'll see that any single person that we stop and really get to know is so intricate and so impossible to predict what they will do next. So we remember that each individual person has dignity and worth and value, and that if we are not seeing it, it is likely that we are not mindful of the individual differences of that person, and we are seeing their hurt through a lens that we are often trying to protect ourselves from their hurt. The importance of human relationships. This is at the heart of all of it. People say, what kind of population do you work with as a social worker, as a therapist? And I have often said, I work with kids 0 to 99. I work with inner childs of all ages. And regardless of what people put down on their forms of why they're here to see me, what would you like to see changed in your life? What is it that brings you in today? What can we focus on? What are the problems that are most persistent in your life? The answer, the solution, the cure, and the comfort is often in human relationships. Repairing a relationship, eliminating a relationship that's harmful, building relationships that support growth and well-being. The value we have of integrity is that people don't want us at parties. There's a lot of things people know not to say around a social worker, right? And I have phone calls with family members of my patients, and they're like, "Oh, you're the therapist, you're okay, but the social worker, what is the social worker going to say?" And I say, "Well, I'm also the social worker," right? Because social workers have that magnifying glass and we see the things and they know we are what's the magic word? Mandated reporters. I really encourage you to think about mandated reporting and mandated investigating as two different things, in the service of a fair and just society. Social workers are continually aware of the profession's mission, values, ethical principles, and ethical standards. And it is crazy making for me when I'm dealing with organizations that do not behave with integrity. However, that is not the role of organizations. As a patient told me several years ago, the person was sitting and holding. They were a probation client who had tested, had a positive urine screen for cocaine, and they were feeling like they wanted to maybe end their life. And I went in and was talking with them and, what brings you here and how did you get into this and how long have you been on probation? They said, "I just needed to get out of jail and I pled guilty." I said, I believe you. I'm so curious what would make you plead guilty, because I feel like I would never plead to something I didn't do. And he said, "It says it on the sign. It's the court of common pleas, not the court of common justice. And it's definitely set up to make you take a plea and to keep turning the screws until you do it." So is integrity a value of our criminal justice system? I would say the system behaving in a trustworthy manner is up for debate. And I think it's kind of a one-sided debate, right? But what about social workers within that system? Are we behaving in front of our clients in a manner where they can trust us when we say we will or will not tell? We must or we must not tell. And there's many patient stories that, patients have told me. I said, why didn't you tell me this was going on? And they said, I was afraid you and all your coworkers would laugh at me because I know how office people talk. So we are supposed to be behaving with integrity. And I think social work has hurt and has done hurt to people. And there's a reason, just like in criminal justice, that our clients have trust issues with us. So do we act honestly and responsibly? Do we promote ethical practices? Do we say, yeah, that's just, I have to say that I would do that, but here's what I'll really do? Because that is really communicating a lack of integrity when we're doing that in practice matters. Value, competence. This one scares a lot of social workers. And I want to tell you that all of the things that the state of Ohio revised code says that you can do, you will have to do for the first time. There is no person on this earth who has ever been born having done an intake assessment. So everyone's got to do the first one, right? No counselors were born. You always have to have a first patient. No supervisors were born. We were all formed and forged in fire. Baptism by fire. But practicing outside of your competence, we know when we're doing it, right? It's when we are trying to wear too many hats all at the same time. We enhance our professional expertise. What does this mean? If someone says to me, can you treat someone with obsessive compulsive disorder? And I say, oh, I've been doing this a long time. I wonder what's an effective method of treating obsessive compulsive disorder. Well, I know from my social work studies that motivational interviewing and cognitive behavioral therapy are evidence-based for like a ton of things, right? So I want to look those things up. And I want to say, is that within my scope of treatment? And is this the best treatment this person could have? And it turns out cognitive behavioral therapy with a few adjustments is the frontline treatment. So yes, I can treat a patient with obsessive compulsive disorder. I may not feel competent because it gives me the belly wobblies because I've never done it before. And it feels pretty risky. However, we should be continuing to strive to expand our skill set through our career. The ethical standards have lots of things that we can go over. There are many sections on this that I, much to your dismay, I'm sure, am not going to be reading to you out loud. When we look at social workers' ethical standards. All right. Slow down. Be calm. Be still. Code of ethics. Read it online. Preamble, purpose, principles. We've already moved through all those things. So our ethical responsibility to clients are listed here. And there are paragraphs of each one of them. What's this really long one? Privacy and confidentiality. Don't you feel like everything should be very, very private as a social worker? I hope that you do. Here in school, we have FERPA, which is the Family Educational Something Protection Act. And in healthcare, we have HIPAA, which is Health Information Portability Act and Accountability Act. But privacy and confidentiality of social workers is a separate standard within the Code of Ethics. And even if you are not an LISWS, if you are not an SWT, it doesn't matter. All social workers have the same privacy and confidentiality, access to records, and sexual relationships, on and on. These are wonderful things to refer to so that you can understand and not just be behaving by your organization's policies, because organizations, according to campaign finance law, organizations are people too. And so they make mistakes and they have their own values, and social workers' values are separate. The ethical responsibilities to our colleagues are much shorter. We have this many: laws, rules, regulations, and ethical responsibilities to clients. Colleagues, we still have some information here. Incompetence of colleagues. Generally, your organization will have some kind of a mandated reporting structure on incompetence of colleagues and unethical conduct of colleagues. But if you are going to report a colleague, you do not report them to the NASW. Even though they're NASW standards, you report them to the counselor, social worker, marriage and family therapist board, clearly. There are social worker ethical responsibilities in practice settings, many of which involve making a decision, realizing there's a dilemma, and documenting what you are doing. We have ethical responsibilities as professionals to colleagues and as professionals that go above and beyond your agency's organizational policies. I was so close. Okay. Competence, we're talking about it again. We should accept responsibility or employment only on the basis of existing competence or the intention to acquire the necessary competence. Doesn't that seem so easy to do? I will apply for a job at a residential youth facility if I have experience working in residential facilities, working with youth, or if they have a training program on site where they will work with me. And most organizations in social work have extensive manualized interventions. Social workers should not engage in uninvited solicitation of clients. And so this is something in private practice. I have a site at a residential home. It's a residential care facility for older adults. It is not a nursing home. They are independently living seniors. And I cannot just knock door to door and be like, do you need a therapist? Or do you need a social worker? Here's the form, because it's considered soliciting. So whether or not my organization has a policy for that, I cannot go door to door. So we had to work out our own referral process, which is developing relationships with the aides, with the nursing home staff, with the director of nursing, with the executive director, with the facility maintenance people to say, hey, here are some of the competencies that I have. Here's the populations that I work with. We have responsibilities to our social work profession as well as to the broader society for social and political action, which, if you are not hip to it, the NASW has all kinds of lovely meetings. There's a Zoom coming up on House Bill 68 that is all day long, and I just can't wait to attend. It's like 8 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. because there's always new rules, new laws, and things up for discussion that can affect our liabilities. One of the things I wanted to show you in the state of Ohio is about immunity, right? So this is something that it's great that all this information is available, and that's why I'm giving you these slides and I'm taking the time to go through them, maybe not exhaustively. I want you to feel like these are resources that are available to you throughout your career, because I'm the question asker, right? I'm the one who they say, someone other than Patti, please, because I really want to know the implications of what people are telling me and why they say it. So for the purposes of this mental health professional immunity, a person who holds a license is a mental health professional. So social workers are considered a mental health professional here. The license holder is not liable in damages in a civil action and shall not be subject to disciplinary action by the counselor, social worker, and marriage and family therapist board for disclosing any confidential information about a client that is disclosed for the purposes of section 2305.51 of the revised code. Now, you don't need to memorize all the codes, and you don't need to know all the ins and outs of privacy and FERPA and HIPAA to know if someone is standing on the edge of a bridge, you're going to call 911 and give their name. That's protected information. You're going to tell your relationship with them. That's protected information. You're going to disclose things that they have not signed a release of information for. That's protected information. And sometimes those people are going to threaten to sue you, and they cannot. You are not liable. Now, I would have loved this sentence when I was a 21-year-old mother, and I would have nightmares that I accidentally completed Medicaid fraud. I billed the wrong time. I wrote it down later, and they caught me, and I'm in jail, and I'm banging on the glass. We're trying to hold my baby. I'm sorry. I didn't know. You are not. I mean, it would have been very reassuring to me. People can't sue you or send you to prison for, this is the link to, that you are not liable for violent behavior by a client or a patient. So civil rights, they're talking about sharing information, that people have the civil right to be private, and people also have the civil right to refuse treatment. And you can still call the Department of Children's Services, Adult Protective Services, the Board of Developmental Disabilities, EMS for help to protect a person with a named target, right? So the named target can be themselves or someone else, and you're not liable for what happens. All you can do is report, right? These are really important things to know that you can do throughout your career. So that concludes with my references the lecture this week on the Code of Ethics. If you're in my Social Work 626 class, you also have a Maton 2008 article on community engagement. And you will be working on your assignment number 1, which is due next week, where you are going to be detailing where in the neighborhood, in the community that you are working in. So that might be a specific population. Maybe you want to advocate for suicide intervention. Maybe you are trying to organize a learning collaborative. Maybe you want a community action network within a geographical neighborhood. So who and how and what that looks like is as unique as each one of you students are. And I hope that they're coming along. And as always, just email me if you have questions. Thank you. I'm Professor Patti with Wellness Cleveland VIP.